The sun rises over the marble columns of Athens, casting long shadows across the Agora where voices rise in heated debate. This isn't just history, it's the birthplace of ideas that still shape how we govern, think, and argue today. What if I told you the average Athenian citizen spent more time discussing philosophy than we do scrolling social media? In a world where politics and wisdom walked hand in hand, ordinary people, farmers, artisans, even shopkeepers held power to sway decisions that would echo through millennia. We're about to step into the sandals of these ancient thinkers, where every corner held a lesson in democracy, every conversation a masterclass in critical thought. From Socrates challenging passers, to Pericles rallying crowds with words that still stir souls, this is the untold rhythm of daily life in a city that refused to think small. The questions they debated over wine and olives 2,500 years ago might just hold answers we're still searching for. Picture this: a bustling city where fishermen and potters had just as much say in running the state as wealthy landowners. That was the revolutionary idea Athens dared to put into practice long before the word democracy became a global ideal. It all began with Cleisthenes, a nobleman who turned against his own class, dismantling centuries of aristocratic rule not with weapons but with paperwork. His genius reorganizing society into 10 new tribes, each a mix of rich and poor, urban and rural. Suddenly, family connections mattered less than citizenship, and power shifted to the people, or at least the freeborn men who qualified. At the heart of it all stood the Ecclesia, an open-air assembly where any citizen could step forward and speak. Imagine 6,000 voices debating war, taxes, and justice under the Mediterranean sun. No representatives, no middlemen, just raw, direct democracy in action. Behind the scenes, the Boule, a council of 500 chosen by lottery, kept the machinery running, drafting proposals and setting the agenda. It was messy, it was loud, and sometimes it turned ugly. Exile votes could banish a leader just for being too popular. And yet, for all its flaws, this system sparked something extraordinary. The very idea that ordinary people could govern themselves without kings or tyrants was radical beyond measure. Of course, we can't ignore the glaring gaps. Women were barred from politics, enslaved people outnumbered citizens, and immigrants had no voice. But in that tension between idealism and exclusion lies a powerful lesson. Athenian democracy wasn't a finished product. It was a bold, imperfect experiment that asked a question we're still wrestling with today: who truly gets to shape the future? The Agora wasn't just a marketplace, it was the beating heart of Athenian democracy, where the smell of fresh bread mixed with the heat of political debate. Walk through its colonnades and you'd see fishmongers haggling next to philosophers sparring over truth, politicians gathering crowds while potters stacked their wares. No modern shopping mall or city square could match its energy. Here, the line between daily errands and high-stakes governance blurred completely. Socrates made these streets his classroom, stopping merchants and soldiers alike with provocative questions. What is justice? He might ask a baker kneading dough, turning routine chatter into profound reflection. Meanwhile, under the shade of the Stoa Poikile, politicians tested speeches before presenting them to the Ecclesia, refining their words through real-time feedback from ordinary citizens. Even jury duty began here, with volunteers plucked at random from those milling about justice served by the people, literally. Commerce and civic duty flowed together seamlessly. A farmer selling olives might pause to cast his vote on military funding, while a sculptor could leave his workshop to join a heated debate on foreign policy. The Agora thrived on this collision of perspectives, wealthy landowners rubbing shoulders with day laborers, all united by their shared right to speak and be heard. And when the herald's voice cut through the din to announce a new play or proposed law, the entire crowd fell silent, reminded that in Athens, even entertainment carried the weight of civic duty. This was democracy stripped bare, no sterile government buildings, no barriers between leaders and citizens, just open space, open voices, and the relentless Athenian belief that every free man had something to contribute. The stalls selling spices and pottery weren't just shops, they were the front line of a society daring to imagine that wisdom could emerge from the crowd, not just from kings or priests. 2,000 years later, we still struggle to match the Agora's radical simplicity, that a city's soul belongs wherever its people gather. Between casting votes and debating philosophy, Athenian citizens carried another heavy responsibility, one that could demand their very lives. Every freeborn man stood ready not just to govern but to fight. While modern societies separate soldiers and civilians, Athens fused these roles into a single identity, the citizen soldier. Boys as young as 18 began rigorous training in the gymnasium, mastering the spear and shield they might soon carry into battle. This wasn't just preparation for war, it was training for citizenship itself. The phalanx formation became the ultimate expression of Athenian values, a wall of interlocking shields where no man fought alone. Wealthy aristocrats stood shoulder to shoulder with farmers and craftsmen, all equal in the line. One misstep could collapse the entire formation, making cooperation a matter of survival. Just as in the assembly, success depended on unity. That's why military defeats often led to political upheaval back home. Failure in battle shook confidence in democracy itself. But what made this system extraordinary wasn't just the fighting, it was the coming home. Veterans brought battlefield lessons into political debates, reminding their fellow citizens that decisions in the Agora had life or death consequences. When Pericles famously declared that Athenians didn't just obey laws but understood them, he spoke to this deep connection between civic and military duty. Even their funerals blurred the lines. Fallen soldiers received public burials where speeches honored them not just as warriors, but as active participants in democracy. Yet this ideal had cracks. As Athens' empire grew, prolonged overseas campaigns strained the system. The poorer hoplites, men who supplied their own armor, faced financial ruin if harvests failed while they were deployed. Meanwhile, the wealthiest citizens funded trireme warships, turning naval power into a display of prestige. The very unity celebrated in the phalanx began fraying as class tensions mounted. It's a paradox that still resonates today. How can a society balance the burdens of defense without dividing its citizens? Athens never fully solved it, but their attempt reshaped history. This fusion of sword and scroll gave Athenian democracy its grit. Unlike mercenaries who fought for pay or modern professional armies, these men battled for something visceral, their right to govern themselves. Next time you hear politicians talk lightly of war, remember the Athenians, a people who understood that every vote could mean sending their neighbor's son or their own into the shield wall. That weight of responsibility might be their most enduring lesson. The Athenians had a radical solution for leaders who grew too powerful, a kind of democratic timeout that could send even the most celebrated generals and statesmen packing. Every winter, citizens gathered in the Agora with broken pieces of pottery ostraca, scrawling the name of whoever they saw as a threat to democracy. No trials, no formal charges, just a simple question. Had one person's influence become dangerous to the system itself? If at least 6,000 votes were cast, the winner had 10 days to leave the city for a decade with their property and honor intact. It wasn't punishment, it was prevention. Take Themistocles, the architect of Athens' naval victory against Persia at Salamis. This war hero, once hailed as the city's savior, later found his name scratched on enough clay shards to exile him. Why, some whispered he'd grown arrogant, others suspected his ties to Sparta. But the deeper truth was this: Athenians feared the cult of personality more than foreign invasions. Even brilliance couldn't excuse the risk of one voice drowning out the rest. Yet ostracism wasn't blind mob rule. The process required overwhelming consensus. You couldn't banish rivals on a whim. Archaeologists have unearthed caches of ostraca with the same names written in identical handwriting, evidence of organized campaigns. Sometimes the system worked as intended, cooling tensions before they boiled over. Other times it backfired, like exiling Aristides the Just, merely because voters grew tired of his moralizing. The real genius of ostracism lay in its restraint. Unlike executions or imprisonments, it offered a peaceful reset, allowing hot tempers to cool without bloodshed. Leaders could return after their exile, their rights restored, as if the city understood that even good people could become risks in turbulent times. In an era when most Greek states toppled between tyranny and chaos, Athens' willingness to exile its stars may well have saved its democracy. Modern democracies still grapple with this tension: how to check power without stifling it, how to guard against demagogues without silencing dissent. The ostraca remind us that no society truly outgrows these questions. They sit in museums now, those scratched pottery fragments, each one a whisper from the past. Trust the people, but never stop asking who really holds the rein. Athenian philosophy didn't happen behind closed doors or in ivory towers. It erupted in the middle of the street, raw and unrehearsed. Picture Socrates, barefoot and unkempt, ambushing a politician mid-stride with a deceptively simple question: "What exactly do you mean by justice?" There were no lecture halls, no tuition fees, just the hum of the city as the backdrop for some of history's most explosive ideas. This was philosophy stripped of pretension, where truth wasn't handed down by experts but wrestled from everyday conversation. The Socratic method turned debate into a civic sport. Like a philosophical sparring match, it worked by dismantling assumptions, one relentless question at a time. A merchant might insist he knew the meaning of courage until Socrates' probing revealed contradictions in his thinking. The goal wasn't to humiliate but to awaken. In a society where every citizen voted on matters of war and peace, clear thinking wasn't just an intellectual luxury, it was survival. Remarkably, these thinkers didn't write textbooks, they lived their philosophy. Diogenes, the notorious cynic, lived in a tub to mock materialism, holding up a lantern in broad daylight, searching for an honest man. Meanwhile, sophists roamed the Agora offering lessons in rhetoric for a fee, teaching citizens how to persuade crowds in the assembly. Even this sparked controversy. Was rhetoric a tool for truth or manipulation? The debate itself became part of Athens' DNA, proof that philosophy wasn't just about answers but about learning how to think. This street corner wisdom had a darker edge, though. Socrates' habit of questioning everything, including the gods, eventually cost him his life. His trial exposed the tension at Athens' core, a city that prized free thought but feared its consequences. Yet even in death, he became the ultimate symbol of philosophy's power, sipping hemlock while calmly debating the immortality of the soul. His students, like Plato, would later formalize these ideas, but the essence remained. True wisdom began with admitting how little one actually knew. What made Athenian philosophy revolutionary wasn't just the ideas but the belief that every baker, soldier, or potter deserved to engage with them. In a world where we often outsource deep thinking to specialists, their example still challenges us. What if we treated questioning not as rebellion but as the highest form of citizenship? The echoes of those Athenian debates linger wherever people dare to ask, but why? Not to tear down, but to build something better. A grove of olive trees just outside Athens' city walls buzzed with a new kind of energy in the 4th century BC, not with the clamor of the Agora, but with the quiet intensity of minds at work. Here, Plato founded the Academy, a sanctuary for ideas that would outlive empires. Unlike the rowdy debates of the assembly, this was a space for structured inquiry, where students paced shaded walkways dissecting the nature of justice, the soul, and the perfect state. For the first time in history, higher learning wasn't tied to religious ritual or apprenticeship, but to the pursuit of wisdom itself. At the heart of Plato's teaching lay a paradox. The man who revered his mentor Socrates also distrusted the democracy that condemned him. His republic painted Athenian politics as a ship steered by ignorant sailors, arguing instead for rule by philosopher kings, those rare souls who'd spent years studying the eternal truths behind the visible world. To modern ears, this sounds like elitism, and in many ways it was. But Plato's deeper critique still stings. Can a society thrive if its leaders value popularity over expertise, rhetoric over truth? Yet the Academy was no ivory tower. Its students included future lawmakers and generals, men who'd apply these theories to real-world governance. Plato's pupil Dion famously tried to mold Syracuse's tyrant into a philosopher king, a disastrous experiment that proved how messy idealism becomes when it touches human nature. Even Plato's later works, like the Laws, tempered his utopianism with practical compromises, suggesting that the best government might be a blend of democracy and wisdom-guided leadership. What makes his legacy so enduring isn't the answers he gave, but the questions he forced into the light. Should leaders be trained like athletes rigorously and for life? Does true justice require reshaping human nature itself? Athenian democracy had thrived on participation, but Plato dared to ask, participation to what end? His vision of philosopher rulers may seem outdated, but the tension it exposed between popular will and informed governance still haunts every modern state. The Academy's true triumph was marrying philosophy to political action. While Socrates questioned individuals in the marketplace, Plato built an institution that trained thinkers to reshape systems. Walking those olive-shaded paths, students didn't just debate ideals, they grappled with the hardest puzzle of all: how to turn lofty concepts into a living city. That challenge, as fresh today as it was 2 millennia ago, is why Plato's grove still echoes in every classroom where power and ethics collide. At the crossroads of theory and real-world governance stood Aristotle, the thinker who dragged philosophy down from the stars to study the dirt beneath our feet. Where his teacher Plato sought perfect forms in the abstract, this relentless observer collected constitutions like specimens, dissecting 158 city-states to understand what made societies thrive or collapse. His conclusions: good governance wasn't about chasing utopias but balancing competing forces, the rich against the poor, individual freedom against collective good. In politics, Aristotle gave us the first comparative government textbook, categorizing regimes with clinical precision. Monarchies could become tyrannies, he noted. Aristocracies might decay into oligarchies. But his sharpest insight was about democracy itself, not inherently good or bad, but volatile. Left unchecked, it could descend into mob rule fueled by charismatic demagogues promising bread and circuses. His solution, a politia, a mixed constitution blending democratic participation with aristocratic wisdom, much like a ship needing both sails and anchors. We often forget this cerebral man tutored history's most explosive conqueror, young Alexander of Macedon. Their unlikely partnership, the methodical philosopher and the reckless prince, demonstrated Aristotle's core belief: knowledge must engage with power to matter. While Alexander's campaigns spread Greek culture eastward, his former mentor's ideas were quietly revolutionizing how cities organized themselves. The pupil built an empire, the teacher built the intellectual frameworks that would outlast it. Aristotle's genius lay in finding patterns amid chaos. Watching Athens swing between radical democracy and oligarchic coups, he identified moderation as the rarest yet most vital political virtue. His Nicomachean ethics argued that good citizens and good leaders were those who navigated between extremes, much like a skilled sailor adjusting to shifting winds. This wasn't just philosophy, it was survival advice for a fragile democracy. What makes his work timeless is its grounding in human nature. Where Plato's Republic demanded people change to fit the system, Aristotle's Politics adapted systems to fit flawed, passionate humans. He saw Athens not as a failed ideal but as a living laboratory, one whose experiments, both brilliant and disastrous, revealed universal truths about power, justice, and community. Every modern debate about checks and balances, every struggle to curb populism without stifling participation, carries echoes of his pragmatic voice asking, not what's perfect but what's possible. Beneath the marble grandeur of Athens' political stage, a parallel world thrived, one where women shaped the city's soul without ever stepping into the assembly. While history books fixate on the men debating in the Agora, the truth is far more layered. Athenian women weren't just sidelined, they were the unseen architects of daily life, managing households that functioned like miniature economies. From grinding grain to weaving textiles, their labor fueled the city's engine. A single home might produce everything from olive oil to pottery, with the matron overseeing a small army of enslaved workers and servants. This wasn't just domestic drudgery, it was economic power in its purest form, even if it went uncelebrated. Religion offered another avenue for influence. Priestesses like those serving Athena Polias held roles no man could touch. They presided over sacred rites, interpreted omens, and guarded temple treasuries, some of the city's most vital assets. During festivals like the Panathenaic, all eyes turned to these women as they led processions through the streets, draped in robes woven by their own hands. Their authority wasn't symbolic, it was institutional. When the Oracle of Delphi spoke, even generals and statesmen listened. In a society that barred women from voting, the divine was their domain, and their voices carried weight no politician could ignore. The stage, too, became a battleground for exploring female agency. Playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides filled their tragedies with women who defied conventions, Antigone burying her brother against royal decree, Medea wielding vengeance with terrifying precision. These characters weren't just fiction, they mirrored real tensions simmering beneath Athens' polished surface. Every time an audience applauded Antigone's defiance, they grappled with uncomfortable questions. What happens when moral duty clashes with man-made laws? Can a society truly flourish if it silences half its voices? Even philosophy wasn't immune to these contradictions. Socrates, famously skeptical of democracy, reportedly learned the art of dialectic from a woman, the priestess Diotima. Yet his star pupil Plato would later dismiss female rulers as impractical in his Republic, only to backtrack in his later works. This tension reveals something profound. For all their exclusion, women's influence seeped into Athenian thought like water through cracks in marble. This hidden history forces us to expand what we consider power. Citizenship wasn't just about casting votes, it was about weaving the social fabric that made those votes possible. The woman grinding grain at dawn ensured the citizen could debate at noon. The priestess interpreting the gods will shape the policies those citizens would later debate. Athenian democracy, for all its brilliance, was a symphony missing half its instruments, and yet the music still carried echoes of those absent players. Perhaps their greatest legacy is the question they left hanging. How much grander might the chorus have sounded if all voices had been heard? The gleaming temples and vibrant debates of Athens came at a hidden cost, one measured in chains and silenced voices. While citizens gathered in the Agora to extol liberty, Beneath their sandals lay the silver mines of Lorien, where enslaved workers toiled in darkness, their backs bending under the weight of democracy's currency. Historians estimate that at its peak, 1 in 3 Athenians was enslaved, outnumbering free citizens in households, workshops, and fields. This wasn't just an economic system, it was the unspoken pillar holding up the world's first democracy. Enslaved labor took countless forms, some brutal, others deceptively mundane. The wealthiest households might own dozens, from Thracian nursemaids to Syrian scribes, while even modest farms relied on enslaved hands to tend olive groves. State-owned slaves, like the Scythian archers who policed the assembly, enforced order among the very citizens who debated freedom. The cruelest fate awaited those sent to the mines, where life expectancy was shorter than the time it took to carve a single drachma from the rock. Yet without their labor, Athens could never have afforded its navy, the same fleet that safeguarded its democracy from Persian invaders. Philosophers who championed reason stumbled over this moral blind spot. Aristotle famously argued that some people were natural slaves, as if chains could be justified by biology. Even Pericles, the great democrat, funded his grand building projects with silver extracted by those who'd never tasted the freedoms of the city they built. The contradiction cuts deep. A society that pioneered individual rights somehow failed to see the humanity in those who cooked their meals, tilled their soil, or nursed their children. Yet cracks in this system occasionally shimmered. Some enslaved individuals, like the banker Paesion, bought their freedom and rose to prominence. Others, like the workers in the mines, staged rare but daring revolts. Their stories whisper a truth that unsettles Athens' gleaming legacy, that democracy's light cast long shadows. Confronting this paradox doesn't diminish Athens' achievements, it deepens our understanding of how fragile progress truly is. Every drachma spent in the Agora, every hour devoted to philosophy, every vote cast in the assembly, all were underwritten by lives unseen. As we marvel at ancient democracy's brilliance, we must also ask, what invisible foundations prop up our own societies today? The silence of those Athenian slaves echoes across millennia, reminding us that true freedom is never universal until it's shared. The stone seats of the theater of Dionysus didn't just host plays, they became a battleground for Athens' conscience. When the chorus's voices rose over the crowd, it wasn't mere performance, it was democracy dissecting itself in real time. Picture this: 17,000 citizens, rich and poor, young and old, gathered under open skies, not to escape reality but to confront it. The masks actors wore weren't just costumes, they were lenses magnifying the city's deepest tensions. Sophocles' Antigone tore at the fabric of Athenian values with brutal clarity. A young woman defying a king's decree to bury her brother became a lightning rod for debates about unwritten laws versus civic obedience. The audience, many still buzzing from recent debates in the assembly, didn't just watch the conflict, they lived it. Was Creon a tyrant or a principled leader? Was Antigone heroic or reckless? The play offered no easy answers, only a mirror held up to a society wrestling with the same questions in its courts and streets. Euripides pushed even harder, scripting heroines who shattered Greek norms. In Medea, a foreign woman with no political power commits the unthinkable, challenging the audience's assumptions about justice and vengeance. The real shock wasn't her violence, it was the unsettling empathy she evoked. Athenians who'd never questioned a husband's authority in daily life found themselves whispering, "What if she's right?" These weren't just stories, they were pressure valves for a culture straining under its own ideals. The Dionysia festival, where these plays premiered, blurred the line between art and governance. Wealthy citizens funded productions as a civic duty, while judges selected from the audience voted for winners, echoing the same democratic processes used to elect generals. Prizes weren't just about artistic merit but social impact. When Aristophanes mocked Socrates in the clouds, the philosopher allegedly stood during performances so crowds could compare the caricature to the man-proof that satire had teeth sharp enough to draw blood from reputations. What made Athenian theatre revolutionary wasn't its spectacle but its function. Unlike modern films that distract, these plays demanded engagement. The suffering of Oedipus or the rage of Clytemnestra forced citizens to grapple with fate, free will, and the gods' role in human affairs, themes as vital in the assembly as onstage. In a world without newspapers or social media, drama became the ultimate think piece, where the collective psyche played out its fears and contradictions. This tradition still pulses wherever art challenges power. From Shakespeare's politically charged histories to dystopian novels whispering warnings, we inherit Athens' belief that storytelling isn't just reflection, it's resistance. The next time you lose yourself in a film or play, ask, what invisible agora is this story quietly reshaping? The Greeks knew well that the most dangerous ideas often arrive disguised as entertainment. Athens in the late 5th century BCE stood at a breaking point not from foreign invasion, but from its own unraveling. What began as a rivalry with Sparta exploded into the Peloponnesian War, a brutal 30-year conflict that would expose democracy's fragility. The same city-state that had humbled Persia now found itself crippled by plague, blockaded by Spartan armies, and torn apart from within. Thucydides, an Athenian general turned historian, documented this descent with unflinching clarity, showing how patriotism curdled into paranoia and debate gave way to demagoguery. The Sicilian expedition of 415 BCE became the turning point, a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked. Picture this: Athens, already stretched thin, launched a naval attack on distant Sicily, seduced by promises of wealth and glory. The assembly, swept up in charismatic appeals, ignored wiser voices urging caution. When the campaign ended in catastrophic failure with thousands dead and ships sunk, the city's confidence shattered. Thucydides saw deeper lessons here: how democracies, for all their virtues, could be manipulated by silver-tongued leaders preying on hope and fear. Back home, the war's toll bred treachery. Once unthinkable coups erupted as oligarchs seized power twice, first in 411 BCE, then again after Athens' final defeat. The democratic ideals Pericles had celebrated now seemed like luxuries a desperate city couldn't afford. Even the restored democracy grew vengeful, executing victorious generals after the Battle of Arginusi for failing to rescue shipwrecked sailors, a verdict fueled more by collective trauma than justice. And then came Socrates. The philosopher's trial in 399 BC wasn't just about impiety. It was a society punishing the questions that had once defined it. His relentless probing about virtue, governance, and truth felt dangerous to a city licking its wounds. The same Athens that had nurtured free thought now condemned its sharpest mind, revealing how crisis could turn openness into suspicion. Yet from this wreckage emerged enduring insights. Plato's Republic and Aristotle's Politics both grappled with the war's scars, asking how to balance stability with liberty. Thucydides' Chronicle became the first realist text of political science, stripping away idealism to show power's messy mechanics. Most hauntingly, this era reminds us that no system, no matter how brilliant, is immune to fear's corrosion. The Athenians didn't just lose to Sparta. In many ways, they lost themselves, but their stumbles still light our path, warning how easily unity frays when survival hangs in the balance. The courtroom buzzed with restless energy as Socrates faced his jury, not a panel of experts, but 500 ordinary Athenians chosen by lottery. The charges read like an indictment of philosophy itself, corrupting the youth and rejecting the city's gods. What made this moment explosive wasn't just the verdict, but the defendants' audacious response. Instead of begging for mercy or fleeing into exile, Socrates turned the trial into a masterclass in principled defiance. "The unexamined life is not worth living," he declared, throwing down a gauntlet that would echo through millennia. Here was democracy's darkest irony, the same system that cherished free speech now silencing its most relentless questioner. Behind the legal formalities lurked simmering political wounds. Athens had recently endured coups, plague, and catastrophic war. Many jurors saw Socrates' teachings as a threat to social cohesion. His habit of exposing ignorance felt dangerous in a city clinging to stability. His association with figures like Alcibiades, the brilliant but treacherous general, didn't help. Yet Socrates refused to soften his stance. When offered a chance to propose his own punishment, he suggested Athens reward him like an Olympic victor, feeding his infamous irony until the very end. The jury's reaction: a larger majority voted for death than had initially convicted him. Plato's apology immortalized this clash not as a trial but as a collision of values. Socrates' accusers argued for collective truth. He championed the individual's right, no duty, to interrogate it. His famous analogy of the gadfly stinging a sluggish horse framed dissent not as rebellion but as vital civic service. This wasn't just about one man's fate. It tested whether democracy could survive its own contradictions. Could a system built on majority rule protect voices that challenged those majorities? The aftermath revealed Athens' ambivalence. Later generations would erect statues to the man they'd executed, as if trying to reconcile their ideals with their actions. Philosophers like Plato took the lesson to heart, designing utopias where wise rulers insulated truth from public whim. Yet the trial's true legacy lies in its unresolved tension, one that flares wherever societies weigh security against freedom, consensus against conscience. Modern parallels sting with uncomfortable clarity. From whistleblowers to protest movements, societies still grapple with Socrates' core question: how much dissent can a democracy bear before it fractures, and how much must it bear to remain democratic? His hemlock cup wasn't just a death sentence, it was a mirror reflecting the eternal struggle between the individual and the crowd, the verdict on that Athenian jury's decision. History keeps rendering it over and over, with every generation's reckoning with power and truth. Pericles stood atop the Acropolis, surveying a city transformed not by conquest but by vision. While other leaders measured power in territory, this statesman believed grandeur lay in marble and mines. Under his guidance, Athens became a dual wonder, a military powerhouse draped in unparalleled beauty. The Parthenon's columns rose as deliberately as his political strategies, each calculated to elevate the city's spirit alongside its might. His famous funeral oration distilled Athenian democracy into poetry. Mourning soldiers lost in war, Pericles turned eulogy into manifesto. "Our constitution," he declared, "is called a democracy because power rests with the many, not the few." But his genius was linking individual liberty to collective strength, portraying Athens as a place where cobblers and poets alike flourished because they chose to serve the greater good. This wasn't just rhetoric, it was radical branding, packaging civic duty as the ultimate freedom. Yet the same man who championed equality at home ruled an empire abroad with an iron grip. The Delian League, initially an alliance against Persia, morphed into an Athenian-controlled treasury. Member states that resisted found their ships confiscated or their harbors blockaded. Pericles justified this as security, but his critics saw hypocrisy: democracy for Athens, domination for everyone else. Even his cultural splendor had a political edge. The Acropolis reconstruction funded by allies who had no say in its design. The Peloponnesian War exposed this tension. Convinced of Athenian invincibility, Pericles banked on walls and sea power to outlast Sparta. But when plague ravaged the overcrowded city, his strategy crumbled alongside public trust. The leader who once inspired citizens died as Athens began questioning the very ideals he'd enshrined. What makes Pericles' legacy so compelling isn't its perfection, but its paradoxes. He proved that ideals need steel to survive, yet also that steel alone can't sustain them. His Athens birthed timeless art while suppressing dissent, championed equality while exploiting neighbors. In him, we see the eternal dance of principle and pragmatism, and the sobering truth that even the loftiest visions cast shadows. Perhaps his greatest lesson lies not in what he achieved, but in what he couldn't reconcile, that a city, or a civilization, is only as noble as the constraints it places on its own power. The scent of burning incense mingled with the salty Aegean breeze as thousands of sandals shuffled toward the Acropolis, not just in prayer, but in civic duty. In Athens, the gods didn't dwell in some distant heaven. They were woven into the very fabric of daily governance. Take Athena, the city's divine patroness, whose colossal ivory and gold statue inside the Parthenon wasn't merely a religious icon but a political statement. Her presence declared, this democracy operates under celestial approval. Every drachma spent on her temple, every hymn sung at her festival, doubled as an investment in Athenian identity. Festivals like the Panathenaic blurred the line between sacred rite and national pride. Picture this, a procession snaking through the city's heart, carrying a new peplos robe for Athena's statue, woven by specially chosen girls over 9 months. But this wasn't just a religious offering, it was a communal tapestry, both literal and symbolic. Rich and poor marched together, their unity as vital to the ritual as the sacrifices themselves. Even the athletic competitions mirrored the Agora's values. Victory brought glory not just to the individual, but to their entire tribe. The gods' influence extended into raw politics. Before major decisions, envoys trekked to Delphi, where the oracle's cryptic pronouncements could make or break treaties. During the Persian Wars, when the priestess warned of wooden walls protecting Athens, leaders fiercely debated whether she meant literal fortifications or naval power, a divine riddle that shaped military strategy. Meanwhile, courtroom oaths invoked Zeus Horkios, the guardian of vows, turning legal testimony into sacred acts. Perjury wasn't just perjury, it risked divine retribution. This fusion of celestial and civic wasn't about dogma, it was about cohesion. The Athenian calendar revolved around religious festivals, ensuring that even the busiest politician paused to honor Dionysus or Demeter. Theater performances doubled as acts of worship, with tragedies dissecting moral dilemmas under the gods' watchful gaze. What modern societies might label as church and state were inseparable strands in Athens' DNA. Theirs was a world where the divine and democratic weren't rivals but collaborators, each lending the other legitimacy. As we navigate our own debates about shared values and collective purpose, the Athenians whisper a provocative question: can a society truly flourish without sacred narratives to bind it together? Their answer, etched in marble and ritual, still challenges us to weigh what we worship and what worship might cost. The streets of Athens hummed with a different kind of training ground, one where boys as young as 7 traded wooden swords for wax tablets, their education as meticulously crafted as a sculptor's masterpiece. While Spartan youths drilled for war, young Athenians practiced scales on the lyre and wrestled in the palaestra, their lessons blending rhythm and reason into a single pursuit, arete, the art of living excellently. This wasn't just schooling, it was the forging of democratic flesh and bone. A proper Athenian education balanced mind and body like two sides of a well-struck coin. Mornings might begin with Homer's verses, where boys memorized the Iliad not just as poetry but as a manual on honor and leadership. Afternoons brought the gymnasium, where physical training wasn't about brute strength but grace, every discus throw and foot race honing the same discipline needed to stand firm in the assembly's debates. Even music held political weight. Learning to harmonize notes taught future citizens how to harmonize conflicting voices in a crowded democracy. But the real game changer was rhetoric. Enter the sophists, itinerant teachers who, for a fee, transformed wealthy youths into verbal gladiators. Their tools, antithesis to sharpen arguments, rhythm to hold a crowd's ear, and the sly art of making weaker cases sound stronger. Critics like Plato sneered at their transactional approach, but in a society where persuasion meant power, these skills were survival gear. A single well-delivered speech could sway thousands, deciding everything from tax policies to troop deployments. Yet beneath this practical training simmered deeper questions. Philosophers like Socrates pushed students beyond how to speak toward how to think, probing the difference between winning an argument and uncovering truth. Their classrooms had no walls, dialogues unfolded in wrestling schools or under olive trees, turning every conversation into a test of ethics and logic. The goal wasn't just competence but eudaimonia, that elusive state where personal fulfillment and civic duty aligned. This educational ecosystem reveals Athens' boldest wager, that democracy thrives not just on laws but on cultivated minds. A citizen wasn't born, he was made through poetry that stirred empathy, sport that bred resilience, and debates that demanded accountability. The system had gaps. Of course, girls learned domestic arts at home, and the poor relied on rudimentary schooling, but its core idea still challenges us. In an age where education often reduces to job training, the Athenians whisper a radical alternative. What if we taught people not just to earn a living but to shape a society? Their classrooms, noisy with liars and logic, suggest that freedom's survival depends on how deeply we dare to think. The bustling port of Piraeus never slept, a cacophony of creaking ropes, haggling merchants, and amphorae clinking as they rolled from ships to warehouses. Here, far from the lofty debates of the Agora, Athens' true lifeblood flowed. Olive oil bound for Egypt, silver mined by enslaved hands, and grain from the Black Sea to feed a city that couldn't grow enough on its own rocky soil. Maritime trade wasn't just commerce, it was survival. With only 1 in 4 Athenians owning fertile land, the city's prosperity hinged on its ability to dominate the waves and the ledger books. At the heart of this system pulsed the drachma, a currency so trusted it became the Mediterranean's equivalent of the modern dollar. Stamped with Athena's owl, these coins didn't just buy goods, they bought influence. The silver pouring from Laurian's mines funded everything from the Parthenon's construction to the triremes that kept Persian fleets at bay. But naval power came at a cost, literally. Athens' secret weapon was its Symoria system, where the wealthiest citizens bankrolled warships as a form of elite public service. Imagine Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk being legally required to personally fund aircraft carriers, and you grasp the blend of obligation and prestige that fueled Athens' maritime empire. Yet this economic engine had grinding gears. The same silver that minted drachmae also deepened divides as small farmers mortgaged their land to wealthy neighbors, sometimes even their own freedom. Debt slavery reached such crisis levels that reformers like Solon cancelled obligations and banned using citizens as collateral, an ancient precursor to modern debt relief movements. The tension between oligarchs and the poor simmered for generations, erupting in demands to redistribute land or cancel debts entirely. Paradoxically, this unequal system enabled democracy's golden hours. The leisure for political participation, those long days debating in the assembly or serving on juries, relied on enslaved labor and exploitative trade. A single trireme required 200 rowers, many of them paid just enough to keep them at the oars, but not enough to challenge the status quo. Even the philosopher Aristotle bluntly noted that true citizenship required free time from necessary labor, a privilege built on others' unfreedom. What makes Athens' economy so fascinating isn't just its sophistication, but its contradictions. The same city that pioneered democratic ideals also ran on systems we'd condemn today. Yet without these material foundations, the ships, the silver, the brutal math of supply chains, those luminous debates under the Attic sun would have been impossible. It's a reminder that no society, however brilliant, escapes the gritty realities of who profits and who pays. The owl of Athena may have symbolized wisdom, but it flew on wings of trade, exploitation, and hard choices, wingbeats that still echo in every modern economy, balancing ideals against bottom lines. Under the open sky of Athens' legal battlegrounds, justice wasn't handed down by robed magistrates, it erupted from the roar of hundreds of ordinary citizens. Picture 500 jurors, farmers, and potters elbow to elbow on wooden benches, listening as a silver-tongued speechwriter's words determined a man's fate. Unlike modern courtrooms where procedure reigns supreme, Athenian trials were raw collisions of storytelling and strategy, where a defendant might bring his weeping children to the stand or an accuser tear his tunic to demonstrate outrage. The law lived in the people's hands for better and worse. Take the case of Euphialtos, preserved in Lysia's razor-sharp defense speech. Charged with murder after killing his wife's lover, he didn't argue the facts, he crafted a moral drama. Athens' laws commanded me to do this, he proclaimed, painting himself as an enforcer of civic order rather than a jealous husband. With no judge to rule on legal technicalities, his survival hinged solely on whether the jury believed his performance of wounded honor. Meanwhile, masters like Demosthenes turned courtrooms into rhetorical chess matches, where carefully placed tears or well-timed jokes could outmaneuver evidence. This system thrived on democratic ideals but flirted with chaos. Without professional lawyers, wealthy defendants hired speechwriters, logographers to ghostwrite their pleas, while poorer citizens spoke extemporaneously, an uneven playing field masked by the illusion of equal participation. The lack of appeals meant one impassioned speech could send a man to death or exile based on that day's crowd mood. When passions ran high, as during the backlash following the Sicilian expedition's failure, the courts became weapons of mass punishment, with entire groups tried and condemned in frenzied sessions. Yet for all its flaws, Athenian justice held flashes of brilliance. The random lottery selecting juries prevented bribery. You couldn't fix a trial when you didn't know who'd judge it. The sheer size of panels, often 201 to 501 members, made manipulation statistically daunting. Most strikingly, the concept of graph paranomon allowed citizens to prosecute anyone who proposed unlawful decrees, a safeguard against demagoguery that modern democracies might envy. What lingers isn't just the spectacle, but the radical trust in collective wisdom. These citizens believed ordinary men, without legal training, could discern truth through debate and intuition. As we watch modern juries struggle with complex evidence or media circus trials, Athens whispers a provocative question: is justice better served by technical expertise or communal conscience? Their answer, etched in those sun-baked courtrooms, reminds us that fairness has always been as much about human nature as about rules. Amid the clamor of the Agora, voices speaking broken Greek or wearing foreign tunics wove through the crowd. Metics, Athens' indispensable outsiders. These resident foreigners couldn't vote or own land outright, yet their fingerprints were everywhere. Syrian glassblowers shaping delicate vessels in the Kerameikos, Thracian mercenaries patrolling city walls, Phoenician traders unloading spices at Piraeus. The city thrived on their labor and talents while keeping them perpetually at democracy's doorstep, a paradox as striking as the Parthenon's uneven columns. Consider Paesion, a former enslaved man turned meteoric banking tycoon. Starting as a clerk in a financial house, he amassed such wealth that he lent money to the Athenian state itself, funding naval campaigns while barred from joining the assembly that declared them. His eventual honorary citizenship was the exception that proved the rule. Even extraordinary merit rarely cracked open the inner sanctum of Athenian belonging. Yet without Metics like him, the city's economic gears would have ground to a halt. Bankers, shipbuilders, and artisans fueled an empire that politically excluded them. This tension played out in daily life. A Metic paid the Metoikian, a special tax that functioned like a perpetual residency fee and required a citizen sponsor to vouch for their conduct. They could be wealthy landowners leasing property, yet legally they remained guests who could be expelled by a single unfavorable assembly vote. The system offered mobility within strict limits. Metics could serve in the military, sue in courts, and contribute to public festivals, but always as participants, never architects of the democracy their taxes supported. Cultural influences seeped through these barriers. The playwright Menander, son of a Metic, revolutionized comedy with his nuanced characters, while foreign philosophers like Anaxagoras introduced radical ideas about the cosmos. Even religious life absorbed outside elements. The worship of Bendis, a Thracian goddess, gained such popularity that Plato depicted Athenians celebrating her festival in his Republic. Yet for all this exchange, citizenship remained a birthright fortress, guarded by laws requiring both parents to be Athenian, a purity test even Pericles himself couldn't pass under his own later legislation. What does this semi-open door tell us about democracy's unspoken boundaries? Athens welcomed outsiders just enough to benefit from their skills, but never enough to share real power. In our own era of immigration, debates, and contested belonging, their story presses uncomfortable questions. Can any society claim to be truly inclusive while maintaining hierarchies of participation? The Metics' legacy isn't just in the goods they traded or the temples they helped build. It's in the mirror they hold up to every civilization that profits from those it deems perpetual guests. Far from the marble halls of the assembly, a different kind of Athenian excellence took center stage, where the slap of leather sandals on packed earth and the roar of spectators filled the Panathenaic Stadium. Every 4 years, this grand arena became Athens' beating heart, hosting games that rivaled even Olympia's grandeur. But these weren't just athletic contests, they were civic rituals where sweat and strategy became acts of patriotism. Winners here earned more than olive wreaths. Picture a victorious sprinter returning home to hymns composed in his honor, his likeness carved in stone near the Acropolis, a permanent reminder that his legs had brought glory to Athens. The city's poets immortalized these champions alongside generals and statesmen, proving that a strong back or swift stride could elevate a citizen just as surely as a well-argued decree. Training for these events doubled as preparation for battle. The javelin throw mirrored spear combat, the grueling pancration. A brutal mix of wrestling and boxing forged the endurance hoplites needed in the phalanx. Yet the games also served as social glue. When Athenians cheered for local boys racing in the hoplitodromos clad in full armor, they weren't just celebrating athleticism but reaffirming shared values, discipline, courage, and the relentless pursuit of arete. What made these competitions uniquely Athenian was their democratic flair. Unlike Sparta's militarized drills, Athens opened its gymnasia to all citizen classes. A potter's son could outrun an aristocrat, his victory proving merit mattered more than birth. The same egalitarian spirit that fueled political debates thrived on the track, where natural talent and hard work trumped pedigree. But beneath the glory lay subtle tensions. Wealthy patrons funded athletes' training, blurring the line between amateur ideals and professional advantage. And while women were barred from competing, they played crucial roles in religious ceremonies tied to the games. their presence a quiet counterpoint to the male-dominated spectacle. In these sun-baked contests, we see democracy in motion, not through speeches but through the raw display of human potential. The starting line at the Panathenaic Stadium asked the same question as the Agora's debates: what can free people achieve when given the chance to excel? The answer echoed in every footfall, every laurel crown, every ode linking individual triumph to the city's luminous reputation. The Acropolis didn't just dominate Athens' skyline, it whispered a lesson in stone about who held power and how they wanted to be seen. While its gleaming Parthenon celebrated the city's divine protector Athena, every column and step carried a second, more earthly message. Democracy could be as enduring as marble, yet required the collective strength to uphold it. This was architecture as political manifesto, where the very arrangement of space taught citizens how to belong. Climb the Phoenix Hill's worn steps, and you're standing on democracy's bare stage. No thrones, no elevated platforms, just a simple stone speaker's platform facing semicircular terraces. The design was ruthlessly egalitarian. Whether you were a cobbler or a landowner, your voice carried equal weight when addressing the assembly. Even the orientation mattered. Speakers faced inland toward the city, not outward toward the sea, symbolizing that governance belonged to those rooted in Athenian soil. Meanwhile, the Agora's stoa, Basileo's royal stoa, merged law with daily life in plain sight. Here, Athens displayed its constitution on stone steels, transforming legal codes into public art. Passers-by could trace their fingers over the inscribed words, feeling the weight of accountability, a stark contrast to rulers who hid edicts behind palace walls. Even the Maritime, housing official state documents, stood open alongside temples and markets, declaring that transparency itself was sacred. The contrast between these spaces reveals Athens' genius for balancing ideals with reality. While the Phoenix's rough simplicity said every voice matters, the Acropolis' splendor proclaimed, "This city is mighty." Its propylaea gateway intentionally mirrored Persian palace architecture, a deliberate taunt toward their former invaders. Every sculpted frieze on the Parthenon doubled as propaganda. The birth of Athena legitimized the city's divine favor, while the Panathenaic procession frieze showed citizens united in shared ritual. Yet this architectural language had its silences. The towering statues and temples celebrated male citizens, with women and Metics appearing only as supporting figures in decorative art. Even the theater of Dionysus, where plays challenged social norms, kept its priestess's seat inconspicuously small, a reminder that some voices remained architecturally diminished. To walk Athenian streets was to navigate a three-dimensional civics lesson. From the unadorned Bouleuterion, where the council met, to the lavish Odeon of Pericles for musical contests, each structure asked, who is this city for and what does it demand of them? The answer lived in the stones, not just in their beauty, but in their unspoken invitations to participate, to debate, and to remember that even the grandest monuments rested on the collective will of those they served. The clinking of kylix cups and the scent of diluted wine filled the air as shadows lengthened across an Athenian courtyard. This was the Symposium, where democracy's sharpest minds softened into laughter and song. Far from the assembly's formal debates, these all-male drinking parties became laboratories for ideas, where philosophy flirted with intoxication and politics mingled with poetry. A well-curated symposium might begin with libations to Dionysus, then spiral into contests of wit, improvised verses, or heated discussions about love and virtue, all governed by a symposiarch who dictated the wine's strength and the evening's rhythm. Imagine the scene. Reclining on cushioned couches, guests took turns reciting lines from Sappho or debating whether pleasure or duty defined the good life. The lyre passed from hand to hand, its strings vibrating with melodies that could shift from bawdy to profound in a heartbeat. Even Socrates, often the soberest presence, embraced these gatherings. Plato's dialogues immortalize him holding court amid the revelry, turning a tipsy conversation about desire into an exploration of eternal truth. Beyond intellectual exchange, symposia cemented social bonds critical to Athenian life. A young politician might gain a mentor's ear over shared cups. An aspiring poet could debut his work among patrons. The clay vessels themselves told stories painted with scenes of gods and mortals. They became conversation starters, their imagery sparking debates about myth and morality. Yet these gatherings weren't without tension. Jealousy over a beloved flute girl or a poorly received toast could fracture alliances as quickly as they were forged. Meanwhile, daylight hours offered different kinds of communion. Public baths buzzed with gossip and business deals, their steamy chambers erasing class distinctions, for a moment at least. Gymnasiums doubled as social hubs where men exercised nude, a practice that blurred the lines between physical training and philosophical discourse. It was in these spaces, oiled and dusted with sand from the wrestling pit, that Plato later founded his academy, proving leisure and learning were never truly separate in Athens. This rhythm of wine-soaked nights and sunlit exertion reveals a society that understood civic vitality required more than laws and speeches. It needed spaces where minds and bodies could breathe, where competition gave way to camaraderie, and where the arts of living well were practiced as diligently as the arts of governance. In our own era of relentless productivity, the Athenian example whispers a counterintuitive truth. Sometimes, the deepest political work happens when the official business stops and the cups are raised not to power but to humanity. The drums of Macedon grew louder as Athenian democracy took its last labored breaths. In 322 BCE, the once unconquerable city bowed to Alexander's successors, its vaunted assembly stripped of power, its proud fleet dismantled. Yet in that moment of surrender, something unexpected happened. The very defeat that ended Athens' political independence ignited its intellectual conquest of the world. Like olive seeds carried by the wind, its ideas took root far beyond Attica's rocky soil. Centuries later in Rome, Cicero pored over scrolls smuggled from Greece, molding Athenian concepts into Latin treatises on justice and governance. His writings, steeped in Plato's wisdom and Aristotle's pragmatism, became guidebooks for republics yet unborn. Fast forward to 18th century Philadelphia, where James Madison drafted the U.S. Constitution with Thucydides' chronicles open on his desk, the same pages that warned how democracies crumble from within. Athenian fingerprints are everywhere. In the electoral college's tempered populism, in jury trials, even in the architecture of Capitol Hill's marble columns. What's startling isn't just how Athens' frameworks endured, but how they evolved. The founders rejected pure direct democracy, fearing, as the Athenians themselves learned, the tyranny of unchecked majorities. Instead, they blended Athenian participation with Roman stability, creating a hybrid system where representatives filtered public will. It's as if history conducted a grand experiment. Take one part assembly, one part senate, stir in Enlightenment reason and observe. But this legacy isn't just about borrowed blueprints. Athens' true gift was its unresolved questions, the ones that still keep scholars and statesmen awake. How much equality can a society sustain before order fractures? Can a system designed for city-states scale to nations? And most hauntingly, does democracy contain the seeds of its own demise as prosperity breeds complacency? These aren't academic musings, they're live wires in every modern debate about term limits, campaign finance, or judicial review. The Acropolis may have fallen to foreign armies, but the conversations it hosted never truly ceased. From French revolutionaries quoting Pericles to protesters in Hong Kong waving Athenian-style ballads, the city's spirit refuses confinement to history books. Its brilliance and flaws walk beside us in legislative chambers, classrooms, even social media threads where citizens still wrestle with that most Athenian of dilemmas: how to govern ourselves without coming undone. 2,500 years later, the echoes of Athenian sandals still whisper across our modern democracies. Those sun-baked debates in the assembly, those unflinching philosophical questions in the Agora, they weren't just ancient history. They were the first draft of an experiment we're still editing today. The Athenians proved something revolutionary, that ordinary people, when given the tools and the trust, could shape their own destiny. Not perfectly, not always wisely, but with a courage that still takes our breath away. Their legacy isn't preserved in marble alone. You hear it in town hall meetings where neighbors hash out local issues, in classrooms where students dissect ethics, even in online forums where ideas clash and merge. The core Athenian belief that collective wisdom emerges from diverse voices remains our North Star, even when the path gets murky. Yet their story also cautions us: no democracy is immune to division, to fear, to the slow erosion of shared purpose. What makes Athens' journey so compelling isn't its perfection, but its humanity. They stumbled, exiling brilliant minds, waging disastrous wars, excluding women and the enslaved from their vision of equality. But they also showed us how to course correct, how institutions can balance passion with reason, how culture can challenge complacency, how each generation must renew democracy's promise. So here's the invitation they leave us: don't just admire their history, interrogate it. What would Socrates ask about our political discourse today? How might Pericles' funeral oration resonate in an age of fragmented media? The Athenians didn't hand us answers, they handed us tools. Now it's our turn to wield them. Drop your thoughts below where you see Athenian ideals shining brightest in our world. Or where have we strayed from their hard-won lessons? And if you've enjoyed this journey into the cradle of democracy, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped us. History isn't just about the past, it's the compass we use to navigate tomorrow. Let's keep the conversation going. P.S. For those craving more, check the description for my favorite books on Athenian democracy. Some will surprise